Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be talking about motivation. Specifically, we're going to be talking about this idea of motivation 3.0. And just to get us started, we'll be looking at the book Drive by Daniel H. Pink. So, you ready to get into it?
Absolutely. I think it's such a fascinating topic, and Drive really lays out a compelling case for this new way of thinking about motivation.
Yeah. I mean, it's really all about understanding, right?
Mm.
Understanding what makes people tick in the 21st century. You know what I mean? It's not like the old days with just simple carrots and sticks. Like, how do we really motivate ourselves and others in today's world?
Right. It's a completely different landscape.
Exactly. So, before we get into all the details of Motivation 3.0,
Mm.
I think it's important to understand, like, where Pink is coming from, right?
Yeah.
He calls it Motivation 2.0, the classic reward and punishment system, which I got to admit, I still find myself using sometimes. You know, like if I finish this project, I'll treat myself to a fancy coffee.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's ingrained in us, isn't it? We've been conditioned to think that way.
Totally. But what's interesting is that Pink argues that this system, this if-then reward system, can actually backfire, especially for anything beyond those really simple tasks.
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? You'd think a bigger reward would lead to better
Right.
performance.
That's exactly what I thought. Like, it just seems logical, right?
It does, but Pink cites all this research that shows that's not always the case. He talks about this study done in India where they gave people, different tasks, things like throwing tennis balls or solving puzzles, and offered different levels of rewards. And those who were offered the highest reward actually consistently performed the worst.
Oh, wow. Really? That's so interesting. So, like, why? Why would we choke under pressure like that?
Well, it seems like when the stakes are raised and all we can see is that big, juicy carrot, our brains kind of freak out.
Right. Yeah.
It's like that anxiety narrows our focus.
Makes sense.
So it becomes harder to think creatively or strategically. Like we get tunnel vision, you know? We're just fixated on that reward and we totally miss the bigger picture.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the problem here. It's not just about performance, though, right? Pink talks about seven, count them, seven, deadly flaws of relying too heavily on this extrinsic motivation.
He does. And they're all interconnected in a way.
Yeah. Like the first one really hit home for me. He says that they can extinguish intrinsic motivation.
Absolutely. And I think that's where we see the biggest disconnect with that whole if-then reward system. It takes those things that we might naturally enjoy, like solving a puzzle or working on a creative project, and basically turns them into transactions.
Right.
It's no longer about the joy of the activity itself, but about getting that external validation or reward.
It's so true. It reminds me of when I was a kid. I used to love to draw, like all the time. But then, my parents, they started offering me money for every picture I made.
Mm.
And it totally killed the joy for me.
Oh, no.
I just ended up churning out these like generic drawings because all I cared about was the cash.
Right. The reward became the focus, not the act of creating. And it's like that with so many things, hobbies that turn into side hustles or learning for a grade instead of just genuine curiosity.
Yeah, you lose that sense of wonder.
You do.
And it's not just that we lose the joy, right?
Mm.
The second flaw Pink mentions is that extrinsic rewards can actually diminish performance,
Mm.
especially on those tasks that are more complex or conceptual.
Exactly. And he describes this really interesting experiment called the candle problem.
Okay.
So basically, people were given this puzzle to solve, but some were offered a reward and some weren't. And those who were promised a reward actually took longer to solve it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They got so hyper-focused on the reward that they missed the simple, creative solution that was right in front of them.
I see. So it's like the more complex the thinking required, the more likely a big reward is to backfire.
It seems that way. And that leads right into the third flaw.
Yeah.
They can crush creativity.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you're so afraid of not getting the reward, you're less likely to experiment or take risks, right?
Exactly. You're less likely to think outside the box. And that fear of failure can really stifle innovation.
Okay, I'm seeing a pattern here. These first three flaws are all kind of interconnected, right? They all stem from that focus on the external reward instead of the intrinsic satisfaction of the activity itself.
You're absolutely right. And that's really the heart of Pink's argument. We're so conditioned to think of motivation as something that comes from outside ourselves. But he's saying that for a huge range of human endeavors, that's just not true.
Okay, that's really powerful. So let's keep going down this list of flaws. What's number 4?
Number 4 is that they can crowd out good behavior. Pink gives the example of a study where people were paid to donate blood. And get this, donations actually went down.
What? Really? That seems so
I
backwards.
know, right? It's like offering money turned what was originally a selfless act into just a transaction,
Right.
and it diminished that altruistic motivation.
I see.
So people were less likely to donate.
It's like the very act of offering a reward changed the entire moral framework of the situation.
It did. And that leads to flaw number 5, which is a big one. They can encourage cheating, shortcuts, and unethical behavior.
Oof. Yeah, we see that all the time, don't we? Corporate scandals, kids cheating on tests.
Yeah.
It's like the allure of that reward can blind us to the ethical implications of our actions.
For sure. And it's easy to get caught up in that.
Yeah. Okay, what's next?
Number 6 is that they can become addictive,
Oh, that's a good one.
especially with those tangible rewards like money or prizes.
Right.
It's that dopamine hit we get from getting a bonus check or winning an award. And we can get so hooked on that external validation that we lose sight of the intrinsic satisfaction that comes from doing the work itself.
I totally get that. It's like those social media notifications.
Yeah.
You start chasing those likes and comments instead of focusing on creating content you actually care about.
Absolutely. It becomes a whole feedback loop that's hard to break free from.
It really is.
Which brings us to the final flaw. Number 7, they can foster short-term thinking.
Okay.
So we get so fixated on that immediate reward, whether it's that bonus or that promotion, that we don't really consider the long-term consequences or the bigger picture.
Okay, so after hearing all of that, I'm kind of rethinking my whole approach to motivation.
Yeah.
But are you saying rewards are always bad? Like, what about simple tasks? If I want my kid to clean their room, is a little allowance bribe really so terrible?
No, it's not about saying rewards never work. They can be useful, especially for those routine tasks like stuffing envelopes.
Right.
But the point is, they're not the magic bullet we've been led to believe.
Gotcha.
And over-relying on them can actually do more harm than good.
Okay, so if we're not supposed to just dangle carrots and threaten with sticks, what's the alternative? That's where Motivation 3.0 comes in, right?
Exactly. Motivation 3.0 is about tapping into what truly drives us as humans, our intrinsic motivations.
Okay.
Pink argues that it boils down to 3 fundamental needs: autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Okay, those sound pretty good to me. Let's break them down. What does autonomy really mean in this context?
It's about having the freedom to direct our own lives. Having a say in what we do, when we do it, how we do it, and who we do it with. It's that feeling of being in the driver's seat, having ownership over our actions and choices.
I can already feel myself getting more motivated just thinking about that.
Right. And Pink actually gives some interesting examples of companies that have successfully implemented this. He talks about raw Maudie's results-only work environments.
Yeah, I've read about those. It's like employees don't have set schedules or anything. They just have to get their work done however they choose to do it.
Exactly.
I mean, that sounds amazing in theory. Is it actually realistic for most workplaces, though?
It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution, but it's an example of how some companies are starting to embrace that idea of autonomy.
Right.
Pink also talks about FedEx days, where employees get like 24 hours to work on any project they want.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's dedicated time for exploration and innovation.
It is. And it's driven by the employee's own curiosity and passions.
It seems like that would be a breeding ground for some amazing breakthroughs.
It often is. And those kinds of initiatives show that companies are recognizing the power of intrinsic motivation. It's not just about getting people to do what you want. It's about creating an environment where they're naturally driven to do their best work.
Okay, so that's autonomy. What about mastery? I feel like that's something I'm always striving for, but it can be elusive.
It can be. But mastery is really the desire to get better and better at something that matters to us. It's that drive to improve our skills, to challenge ourselves, and to achieve a level of excellence that we can be proud of.
Yeah, and it's not just about the end goal, right? It's about the journey itself, the process of learning and growing. It's those moments where you're so engrossed in a task that time seems to fly by.
We're talking about flow states, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Those moments when you're completely in the zone, fully immersed in what you're doing.
Exactly.
They're almost addictive, but in a good way.
They are. And those flow states are crucial for mastery because they signal that we're engaged and challenged in a way that pushes us to grow. And it's not just good for our work. It's linked to increased happiness and fulfillment in our lives overall.
Okay, so we've got autonomy and mastery. What about the third element of Motivation 3.0?
That's purpose. It's that yearning to be part of something larger than ourselves, to connect our work to a greater good, to feel like what we're doing actually makes a difference in the world.
And that can be tricky, right? I mean, we all want to feel like our work matters, but it's not always easy to find that connection, especially in today's world.
You're right, it can be a challenge, but it's becoming increasingly important, especially for those younger generations entering the workforce. They're not just looking for a paycheck, they want to make a positive impact.
Yeah, it's like that whole shift toward socially conscious businesses, right?
Exactly. Companies that are focused not just on profits, but also on their environmental and social impact.
Exactly. And Pink gives some great examples of this shift in mindset. He talks about the emergence of things like, what are they called? Low profit limited liability corporations,
Right.
or L3Cs for short.
L3Cs, yeah. It's a mouthful.
It is. What are they exactly?
Well, they're a relatively new type of corporation where social benefit is actually prioritized alongside financial gain.
Oh, interesting.
So it's like a hybrid model
I see.
that combines profitability and social impact.
Wow, that's fascinating. So they're like baking purpose into the structure of the business from the very beginning.
They are, and it reflects a growing understanding that purpose and profit don't have to be mutually exclusive. They can
Right.
work together to create something powerful.
Okay, I'm really starting to see the potential of Motivation 3.0, both for individuals and for organizations.
Mm.
But I am curious, like, do you think everyone has the capacity to be intrinsically motivated? What about those people who are just naturally more drawn to external rewards?
That's a great question. And Pink actually addresses that in the book. He talks about type I and type X personalities.
Okay, tell me more about that. What are the differences between these types?
So type I individuals are those who are naturally drawn to intrinsic motivation. They find satisfaction in the work itself, the challenge, the pursuit of mastery. They're more likely to embrace autonomy, seek out challenges, and really find purpose in their work.
I think I might be a type I. I definitely resonate with that description.
Yeah. What about type X?
Yeah, what about type X people?
They're more motivated by those, those carrots and sticks we talked about earlier.
Right,
So external rewards, recognition, the avoidance of punishment, things like that, they might prioritize short-term gains over that, long-term fulfillment.
right.
And they might be less comfortable with autonomy and risk-taking.
Okay. So is one type better than the other?
Not necessarily. It's not about judging or labeling people. It's more about understanding what drives you as an individual and finding a work environment that aligns with your own motivational style.
That's a really important point. We're all complex individuals, right? We've got our own unique blend of motivations. It's about finding what works best for each of us.
Exactly. But I think what's crucial is understanding the power of intrinsic motivation and how it can fuel not just better work, but greater satisfaction and a sense of purpose.
I love that. Now, Pink also talks about this interesting thing he calls purpose maximization.
Yes, he does.
I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, this is where that idea of purpose really intersects with the business world. Pink argues that purpose maximization is actually becoming a driving force for a growing number of organizations.
So it's like companies are realizing there's more to success than just the bottom line.
Precisely. It's about finding ways to align profit with purpose to create value both for the company and for the world. And it's not just about altruism or corporate social responsibility. It's about recognizing that purpose can be a really powerful driver of innovation, engagement, and ultimately profitability.
This reminds me of that anecdote Pink shares about the, what was it, the pronoun test.
Ah, yes. That's a great example of how purpose can manifest itself in a company's culture.
I vaguely remember it. Can you refresh my memory? How does that work exactly?
It's really quite simple. It's about listening to the pronouns employees use when they're talking about their organization. In those thriving, purpose-driven companies, employees will naturally use we when they're talking about the organization.
Like we're working on this exciting new project, or we're committed to making a difference.
Exactly. It reflects that sense of shared ownership, collective purpose, and a deep connection to the company's mission.
That makes total sense. It's like they see themselves as integral parts of something bigger than themselves. They're not just employees, they're contributors and co-creators and stakeholders in the company's success.
Exactly. And conversely, in those less engaged workplaces, employees will tend to use they when they're referring to the company.
Like they're always changing things around here, or they don't really care about us.
Right. And that kind of language reveals a lack of connection, a sense of detachment, and a disconnect from the company's goals.
Wow, that's amazing how such a simple thing as pronoun choice can be so revealing about a company's culture.
It is. And Pink uses this anecdote to illustrate the power of purpose and how it can transform not just individual motivation, but the entire fabric of an organization.
I'm starting to see that. And it makes me think about how this applies not just to companies, but to all sorts of organizations, schools, nonprofits, even families.
You're absolutely right. The principles of Motivation 3.0 are universal. They can be applied in any context where human motivation is a factor.
This has been so insightful so far. It feels like we've only just scratched the surface of Motivation 3.0, though.
There's so much more to explore.
But before we jump into those practical applications, like how we actually put these ideas into action, I want to hear your take on something. If Motivation 3.0 is so powerful, why isn't it more widely embraced? What are the barriers to implementing these ideas in the real world?
That's a great question, and it's one that Pink does address in the book. I think one of the biggest challenges is that Motivation 3.0 requires a fundamental shift in mindset,
Yeah.
both for individuals and for organizations.
Okay, that makes sense. We're so conditioned to think in terms of carrots and sticks that it can be really difficult to break free from that paradigm.
It can, and it requires us to trust our employees, our students, even our children to be intrinsically motivated, to believe that, given the right environment, they will naturally want to learn, grow, and contribute.
It's about letting go of that control, right? And embracing a more collaborative and empowering approach to motivation.
Exactly. And that can be scary for some people, especially those in positions of authority.
I could see that.
But I think the rewards, both for individuals and for organizations, are well worth the risk.
Okay, so let's say we're ready to take that risk, to embrace this new paradigm of motivation. Where do we start? What are some concrete steps we can take to apply the principles of Motivation 3.0 in our own lives and in our organizations?
Well, that's what we'll explore in part 2.
Awesome. Can't wait to dive in. Okay, so we've laid the groundwork here. We've talked about the pitfalls of Motivation 2.0 and the core ideas behind Motivation 3.0, autonomy, mastery, purpose, those things. But, knowing is only half the battle, right? Like, how do we actually put these ideas into action? I'm ready for that, the how-to guide.
Yeah, it's not as simple as a step-by-step manual, unfortunately. But Pink does offer a lot of really practical advice, and I think it starts with shifting our mindset. It's about moving away from this idea that motivation is something that's done to us through those external rewards and punishments, and recognizing it's something we cultivate from within.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's about, taking ownership of our own motivation.
And
Not waiting for someone to, dangle a carrot in front of us, but,
Yeah.
figuring out what truly makes us tick.
Exactly. It's about understanding what brings us a sense of satisfaction, what we find inherently rewarding, and then aligning our work and our lives with those values.
Okay, that sounds great in theory, but it feels, I don't know, a little abstract. Like, where do I even start with that?
Well, Pink suggests starting with some serious self-reflection.
Okay.
Think about those times you felt most engaged, most energized, most alive. What were you doing? What were the circumstances? What were those underlying factors that contributed to those feelings?
Interesting. So it's like taking inventory of our own internal motivators.
Yes.
Those things that, light us up from the inside out.
Exactly. And once you have a clear understanding of what drives you, then you can start looking for opportunities to bring more of those elements into your work and your life.
Okay. I can see how that'd be helpful for, personal goals. Yeah. But what about my job? Let's say I, figure out what really motivates me. What if my current job just doesn't align with those things at all?
That's where it gets a little tricky.
Oh.
And it might require you to get creative.
Oh.
It could involve, having an honest conversation with your boss about having more autonomy over your projects, or maybe seeking out opportunities to learn new skills that align with your passion.
Right. It's about taking initiative and advocating for your own growth and development, not just waiting for someone to, hand it to you.
Precisely. And remember, it's not always going to be a smooth path. Don't be afraid to experiment. Try different approaches, and yes, even fail. Failure is an essential part of that learning process.
That reminds me of Pink's discussion of the importance of having a growth mindset.
Yes.
He talks about Carol Dweck's work, right?
He does. Her research on mindset is so relevant here. She found that people with a growth mindset, they believe their abilities can be developed through hard work, through learning from their mistakes. It's the opposite of that fixed mindset where people believe their intelligence and talent are static.
Right. It's like, instead of seeing setbacks as proof that we're not good enough, we see them as opportunities to learn and get better.
Exactly. And that's crucial for embracing this whole Motivation 3.0 thing, because it allows us to approach challenges with that, that curiosity, that willingness to experiment, which are essential for cultivating autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Okay, so we've talked about reflecting on our motivations.
Yeah.
Experimenting. Cultivating a growth mindset. Like, what else can we do to kind of apply these principles?
Well, think about how you set goals.
Okay.
Are you incorporating those elements of autonomy, mastery, and purpose into your goals?
Hmm. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I usually just like make a to-do list. Like, how do I make my goals more motivation 3.0?
Well, let's take each element in turn. So with autonomy, it's about making sure you have some level of control over how you achieve those goals. Do you have a say in the process? Can you tweak things to make it more enjoyable or align with your strengths?
Okay. So it's not just about the destination. It's about having some agency over the journey.
Exactly. And what about mastery? Are your goals challenging enough to push you to learn and grow? Do they stretch your abilities in a way that feels exciting?
That's where I usually fall short, I think.
Mhm.
I tend to play it safe with my goals.
Pinkin talks about finding those Goldilocks tasks, not too easy, not too hard,
Right.
but just right to kind of push you outside your comfort zone without being completely overwhelming.
Oh, I love that. It makes so much sense. And what about purpose? How do we weave that into, our everyday goals?
Ask yourself why.
Okay.
Why is this goal important to me? How does it connect to something larger than myself? How does it contribute to something I care about?
That's a powerful question. It's like shifting from,
Mm.
from what I'm doing to why I'm doing it.
Exactly. And when our goals are aligned with autonomy, mastery, and purpose, they become so much more than just tasks on a to-do list, you know?
Yeah.
They become sources of motivation, fulfillment, and growth.
I'm really starting to see how this all fits together. But we've been focusing a lot on like individual motivation.
Right.
What about organizations? How
Mhm.
can companies create a culture that embraces motivation 3.0?
That's where leadership comes in. Pinks offers some really insightful advice for leaders who want to foster that more intrinsically motivated workforce.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your take on that. Like, what are some key strategies for building a motivation 3.0 workplace?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to start giving employees more autonomy.
Okay.
I know it can sound scary to some managers, but it doesn't mean letting go of all control.
Right.
It's about finding the right balance, that balance between freedom and accountability.
Right. So it's about empowering employees to like make decisions,
Yes.
take ownership of their work, find their own path to success.
Exactly. And this might require some adjustments to traditional management practices.
Okay.
For example, instead of micromanaging every detail, leaders can focus on setting those clear goals and expectations, and then trusting their employees to figure out the best way to achieve them.
This reminds me of those results-only work environments or rows that we talked about earlier, like shifting the focus from hours worked to results achieved.
Exactly. And when employees feel trusted and empowered, they're more likely to be engaged, productive, and innovative.
Okay, so autonomy is a big one.
Yes.
What about fostering a culture of mastery? How can companies do that?
It starts with creating opportunities for learning and growth.
Okay.
This could involve providing access to training programs, encouraging mentorship and collaboration, or simply giving employees the time and space to explore new ideas and develop their skills.
So it's about investing in employee development
Mhm.
and fostering that like culture of continuous learning.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's also about providing regular feedback, not just that annual performance review,
Right.
but ongoing constructive feedback.
Yeah.
That helps employees understand their strengths, identify areas for improvement, and really track their progress.
Okay, so it seems like a lot of this comes down to like creating the right environment.
Yes.
Pink talks about how companies can create conditions that foster those flow states, right?
He does. He argues that, by designing tasks that are challenging but achievable, providing employees with the resources they need to succeed, minimizing those distractions and interruptions, like companies can create an environment that really supports those moments of deep focus and engagement.
Right. It's like creating the space for people to get into that flow state and do their best work.
Exactly. And when employees are able to experience those flow states regularly, they're more likely to feel motivated, satisfied, and fulfilled in their work.
Okay, so we've talked about autonomy, we've talked about mastery. Now let's dive into purpose.
Yeah.
How can organizations infuse that sense of purpose into their work?
This is where things get really exciting. Infusing purpose is about connecting that company's mission to a greater good, to something that makes a positive impact on the world.
Right. It's like finding that, that why behind the what.
It is. And it might involve supporting a specific cause, or promoting sustainability, or simply striving to make a difference in the lives of their customers or their community.
So it's not just about like, grand gestures or philanthropy.
Right.
It's about finding ways to weave purpose into that everyday fabric of the organization.
You're absolutely right. It's about creating that culture where employees feel like their work has meaning, where they're not just cogs in a machine. They're contributing to something bigger than themselves.
It's like that pronoun test all over again, right?
Yes.
How employees in those purpose-driven organizations naturally use we
Yeah,
when they're talking about the company.
exactly. And that sense of collective purpose can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It fosters a sense of community, shared ownership, and a deep commitment to the company's mission.
So it's a win-win situation, really.
It is.
Employees feel more fulfilled and motivated,
Yeah.
and the company benefits from that, like increased engagement, productivity, innovation, all those good things.
Precisely. And that's the beauty of Motivation 3.0, I think. It's not just about making work more enjoyable. It's about tapping into the full potential of human motivation to create something truly extraordinary.
Okay, I'm feeling incredibly inspired right now. I'm like seeing the world of work through this whole new lens.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, I'm also feeling a little overwhelmed. It's a lot to process, and I'm not sure where to go from here.
That's completely understandable. It's a big shift in thinking, and it takes time to digest and integrate these ideas. But I think the most important thing is to just start somewhere.
Okay, that's helpful. So don't try to do everything at once.
Right.
Just take one step at a time.
Exactly. Pick one thing that really resonated with you. One area where you want to apply these principles and start there. It could be something small, like changing how you set your personal goals, or having a conversation with your boss about, you know, having more autonomy over a project.
Right, those small but significant shifts that can lead to bigger changes over time.
Exactly. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. There's no right or wrong way to do this. It's about experimenting, learning, and finding what works best for you and your unique circumstances.
This has been like such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I'm really starting to see the possibilities. I'm excited to start, putting some of these ideas into action. But before we wrap up, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on something. If Motivation 3.0 is really this powerful, what are the broader implications? How could this impact, our society as a whole?
Oh, that's a great question, and one that's definitely worth exploring further. Like, imagine a world where our education system wasn't so focused on grades and standardized tests,
Yeah,
but on fostering a love of learning,
right.
on nurturing that creativity and curiosity, on helping students discover their own unique talents and passions.
Wow, that would be like a total game changer. It's like shifting that entire paradigm of education from extrinsic rewards to intrinsic motivation.
Exactly. And imagine the impact that could have on society. A generation of individuals who are driven by that sense of purpose, who are passionate about learning and growth, who are committed to making a positive difference in the world.
Okay, I'm getting chills. That's a future I want to be a part of building.
Me too. And I think the principles of Motivation 3.0 can have a profound impact on so many areas of our lives.
Yeah.
Our relationships, our communities, even our personal well-being.
Right. It's about bringing that sense of autonomy, mastery, and purpose into every aspect of our lives.
Exactly. And when we do that, we tap into a source of motivation that is not only more sustainable, but also more fulfilling, more meaningful, and ultimately more transformative.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of what motivates us, both as individuals and as a society.
I'm so glad to hear that. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Likewise. But before we wrap up completely, I have one final question for you and for our listeners. So if we could wave a magic wand, right,
Yeah.
and everybody just started applying these principles of Motivation 3.0, what would our world actually look like? How would things be different?
Ooh, that's really a great question to think about. It's almost like a thought experiment, isn't it? Like, just imagine workplaces where people felt genuinely valued and empowered, not just like, I don't know, cogs in a machine.
Yeah.
And schools that like spark curiosity and a lifelong love of learning, not just teaching to the test.
I love that. So we're talking about like a complete paradigm shift, not just tweaking a few things here and there.
It really is. And I think it has the potential to be like this ripple effect of positive change, not just on an individual level, but like throughout society. Think about the impact on innovation.
Yeah.
If everyone was encouraged to like experiment and take risks without that fear of failure looming over them.
That's a really interesting point. I feel like so much creativity gets stifled because people are just so afraid to like step outside the lines.
Absolutely. And what about the impact on collaboration, you
Yeah,
know? If everyone felt that sense of shared purpose, wouldn't we be more likely to work together
of course.
towards those common goals instead of, constantly competing against each other?
It makes you wonder if we could like solve some of those, really big challenges we're facing, like climate change or
Yeah.
poverty or social injustice, if we were all operating from that more collaborative, purpose-driven framework.
It's a hopeful thought, isn't it?
It is.
And on a more personal level, imagine the impact on our mental and emotional well-being.
Yeah.
If we all felt that greater sense of autonomy, mastery, and purpose in our lives.
That's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. It's like so much of our like modern day stress and anxiety, it comes from that feeling of like not being in control of our own lives.
Yeah,
Like just going through the motion.
yeah. It's that sense of disconnect. Like
Yeah.
we're not living in alignment with our true selves and our deepest values.
Exactly. And Motivation 3.0 offers like a way out of that trap. It's
Yeah.
about taking back control. Find that sweet spot
Yeah.
where, where our passions and our talents and our contributions to the world like all intersect.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And ultimately, I believe it could lead to a world that's not only more productive and innovative, but also more fulfilling, more equitable, and more sustainable for everyone.
That's an inspiring vision for sure.
Yeah.
But it also feels, I don't know, a little bit daunting. It's like, okay, that all sounds amazing, but that like where do we even begin to create that kind of change?
I think it starts with each of us taking those first steps.
Yep.
However small they might seem.
Okay.
It's about applying these principles in our own lives, our relationships, our work, our communities.
So it's not about waiting for someone else to like fix the system. It's about each of us like taking ownership and becoming the change we want to see.
Exactly. And those individual actions, they can have a ripple effect.
Right.
When we start living and working in alignment with these principles, we inspire others to do the same. And that's how we start to create like real lasting change.
I love that. It's
Yeah.
a good reminder that even small actions can make a difference.
They absolutely can. It's about shifting our mindset, our language, our habits, one step at a time.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe those small steps will eventually lead to that transformative change we're all hoping for.
Well, on that hopeful note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into motivation.
We have.
This has been such an incredible journey, and I feel like I've learned so much. Thank you for being such an amazing guide through this fascinating topic.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, the exploration doesn't end here. Keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep striving to create a life that's filled with autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
And to our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has provided you with, some valuable insights and inspiration to fuel your own journey towards greater motivation and fulfillment. Until next time, keep those intrinsic flames burning.